Now we are going to our panel. The moderator is Stephen Dunbar Johnson. Stephen Dunbar Johnson is the president of the International New York Times Company, and he is the man with whom I started the Trust Women Conference in 2012, because when I came with the idea that I was fed up with conferences where nothing happens and I wanted to create one where we will take action, I thought there is people who know how to do a conference and have no idea how to do it. So let's go and learn from them. So I went to see Stephen. He was at the time the president of the Herald Tribune that still existed in Paris. And I knew him well. And I said, I want to do it with you because you have to teach me. He taught me so well that it has become this. So it's someone I really rate high. On the panel, we have Inna Shevenshko. She's the leader of the International Women's Movement, Femen, from Ukraine. Inna, she lives in Paris now. Last Sunday, when the Femen went to show to Trump on the Champs-Élysées what they have to show, I thought, is it her? It was not her, but she was behind. Well done. You will hear from her. She's really good. Rana Ayub is a journalist, and she's an author also from India. And Rana works at the New York Times, and she's a force. You will hear of her treatment in India when they don't like what she writes. It's something, the harassment online, and worse than online. Natalia Ponce de Leon is an activist, and she has been, and she's a survivor of acid attack. A survivor from acid attack in Colombia. So you don't think that, acid attack happen in Latin America. It happens in Latin America, as it happens in London, as it happened a lot before in Pakistan. Before, Pakistan was more or less the worst country for acid attacks. It seems it is no longer, it is spreading. It's unbelievable when you want to destroy the identity of a woman because you are jealous or because she says, no, I don't want you. So we will hear from Natalia. And then we have Jane Waltera Valtrimu. And Jane is an extraordinary person. She's a human rights activist, and she's the co-founder of the Climb for Albinism expedition from Kenya. So, as you know, albinism, which are all the albinos around the world, in Africa, they are not accepted. They think they are witches, etc., etc. She will tell her story. It's really interesting. But the kind of harassment you have also when you are different, she's a testimony of that. I forgot the most important, Carol Robles-Roman. She's the co-president and CEO of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality from the US. She has a big career already, and she is not old at all. But she was the deputy mayor to Michael Bloomberg in New York for years. And then she moved to the charity sector. We have fought together so many causes, so I'm sorry to forget you. And she cut her hair recently.
Around the world, 1 in 3 women has been beaten, raped, or harassed, and in countries like India, the figure is far higher. It can happen while they're walking to work, or walking to school, or even in their own home by someone they know and trust. For women and girls living in India, this is a daily reality. The horrific gang rapes and murders of women, including a student on a New Delhi bus in 2012 and an 8-year-old girl earlier this year, highlight why India is the most dangerous country for women, according to an experts poll by Thomson Reuters Foundation. In 2016, there were 40,000 rape cases in India, a 60% rise since 2012. And nearly half of those cases involved the rape of children. But it's not just physical and sexual abuse. It's no surprise that women and girls are also harassed and abused online, from name-calling, shaming, trolling, and even death threats. In the UK alone, Amnesty reported that 1/3 of young women say they've been threatened with physical or sexual violence online. From the Nobel Peace Prize award to the #MeToo movement, gender violence is now firmly in the global spotlight. But what does this mean for the most vulnerable women and children in the poorest countries? What more can we do to finally end this epidemic of violence against women?
Good afternoon. Monique, thank you for your kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here. And this conference, I think what you've achieved over the last 5 years, 6 years has been remarkable. We're going to talk about a really heavy subject, violence against women and femicide, which is the definition of which is the killing of women and girls by men on account of their gender, is a subject that is frankly given far too little attention to. And we're going to try and remedy some of that this evening. I'm just going to give you a few key facts. And this is just a small sample just to set the scene. Global estimates published by the World Health Organization indicate that 1 in 3, or 35% of women across the globe, have experienced either physical and/or sexual violence in their lifetime. That's 1 in 3. Most of this violence is perpetrated by intimate partners, with 1/3 of women who have been in a relationship reporting that they have experienced some form of violence inflicted upon them by a partner. Psychological violence is also shockingly prevalent. In the EU, here in the EU, for example, according to the UN, 43% of women in 28 member countries have experienced some form of psychological violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Around 120 million girls worldwide have experienced forced sexual intercourse or other forced sexual acts at some point in their lives. By far, the most common perpetrators are current or former husbands, partners, or boyfriends. I could go on quoting a litany of profoundly troubling statistics and data reports, but we have here an incredibly powerful and remarkable group of women to address all of these issues. And Anjali, thank you very much for your comments earlier, because actually we're going to tie back into some of the things that you raised. So Monique has given a brief introduction, but I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on our panelists. We have here, to my right, to your left, Ina Shevchenko, who is the award-winning activist and leader of the international women's movement, Femen. Ina was given political asylum in France in 2011 after facing persecution in her native Ukraine. She, along with her fellow Femen activists, have taken radical feminism to a new level by using their bodies as a symbol of liberation from patriarchal oppression. She has said that I had to show my body to get my voice. She almost paid the ultimate price for doing so when a terrorist opened fire on a forum where she was speaking at in Copenhagen in 2015. Ina, great to have you here. Thank you. We have the prominent Indian journalist, the writer Rana Ayub. Now, Rana actually does not write for the New York Times, although she has written a column for the New York Times, which is was an incredibly powerful column. We're going to talk about that a little later on. Rana has been the subject of a vicious, targeted campaign of online trolling from far right-wing groups in India. She wrote an incredibly powerful opinion piece, one I just referred to, in the New York Times a few months ago. The piece provoked a reaction from the UN, who denounced the cyberbullying culture in India and also insisted that Rana should be protected, saying that her life was in danger. Rana was awarded the Most Resilient Global Journalist Award at the Peace Palace in The Hague just a couple of weeks ago. Rana, thank you for being here. Natalia Ponce de Leon was the victim of an acid attack in 2014. After surviving the attack and after multiple operations, Natalia made the decision she wanted to dedicate her life to the defense and promotion of human rights. for the victims of crimes with chemical agents and established the Natalia Ponce de Leon Foundation, working ever since tirelessly in her native Colombia for a law to make these attacks a specific crime, rather than be classed as personal injury. Her foundation supports attack victims, protecting and promoting their human rights. Natalia, thank you for being here and traveling so far. Jane is a fearsome human rights advocate, mentor, and social entrepreneur who uses her fabulous, larger-than-life personality to change mindsets on albinism. Jane has faced so many battles in her native Kenya because of her albinism, in a culture where people with albinism are often hunted down for ritual killings. Thank you for being here. And we have the veteran of Trust Women on the stage here in Carol Robelas-Roman, who is a truly kick-ass lady. She's a co-president and chief executive of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality, where she leads national efforts to advocate and educate to ensure constitutional equality for women in the United States. Carol has already, Monique has already explained her background working for Mayor Bloomberg, et cetera, so I won't elaborate here. But I think it's great to have you on this panel. I know it's great to have you on panel because we're going to talk about some of the things, actions that can take place, and you're going to help us with that. So through the individual stories we are going to hear here, we're going to then dig a little deeper into different facets of these atrocities and attempt to explain them, and most importantly, to try and identify, as I said, some solutions. So I'm going to just jump straight into it and ask Ina, if you wouldn't mind starting. What inspired you to become a feminist activist? What would you describe, what is an extreme feminist? Could you just give us a little bit about your background, your story?
Right. Thank you very much for this amazing event, for this opportunity to share the stage with such incredible women. I salute you all. I've been listening to incredible speakers at this conference, and many of them came up with inspiring ideas of how we can use various technologies, innovations, how we can use different resources to combat injustice and modern forms of slavery. But if we're here to tell stories today on this panel, my story will be about what do you do when you have no resources and when you have no tools to combat injustice, to fight oppression. What do you do in such situation? And my answer is, if you have no source of empowerment because of the place where you're born, where you happen to be born, or any other reasons, what do you do? And what you do is you become your own source of empowerment. What you do is, from a desperate situation in which you find yourself, you learn to dream, and you start to dream. Because of silence that surrounds you, you learn to be loud, you learn to speak out, and you become loud. And because of ignorance around you, you get involved, and you become engaged. And that's what my story will be about. I was born in Ukraine, in post-Soviet Ukraine, and I grew up in the 90s, the time where the country was on a level and still remain of third world level of poverty, the country with political, economical, social crisis, and of course, as a consequence, the country where women were suffering and still continue to suffer huge, various forms of exploitation, injustice, and discrimination. That's the desperate situation in which I happened to grow up and be a young girl. And that was the reasons why I started to dream very early, to dream about what I could do, how I could change my life, to dream about living a life very different from the life of my mother or even my older sister. I dreamt to become a journalist. And once I got my first job as a journalist in the press office of Kyiv City Administration, which was rather an impressive achievement for a young girl from a small town, I became just part of that system. I became part of that system that deprives millions of women from their rights, that deprives millions of people from prosperities and possibilities. I realized that I'm just part of it, because with my articles, I had to cover up their corruption. I had to contribute to those crimes. And after one of the protests in which I took part, the protest was against the all-male cabinet of ministers, 30 ministers, 30 men were in power. After that protest, I was informed at my job that I cannot work as a journalist because I manifested my political views and my political beliefs, and I already choose my side. Well, and there comes a day where one has to take a position and to take a decision which is neither popular nor safe, where one has to become an activist. And that was the day when I joined Feminine Movement, about which I didn't know so much yet. And I engaged in this fight with fellow young Ukrainian women against sexual exploitation of women, against sex industry, which just destroys destinies of millions of women every day. We developed our fight with years against other forms of injustice and what we considered and identified as other forms, other manifestations of patriarchy, among which we considered dictatorship and religious institutions with their political ambitions. And with that fight, which we conducted in Ukraine, in Russia, in Belarus, around Eastern Europe, we managed to reach the hearts and minds of many other women around the world. And today the movement is international because women in other countries from completely different contexts, with completely different experience and different stories, recognize themselves in the tactic we propose to them, in the tactic of empowering your body and making your body not considering your body anymore as a tool in the hands of patriarchal institutions, but rather as our own political tool in our hands, which we can use against them. This body will not be anymore a tool of oppression that they use against us, but this will be a tool, our political tool of our self-liberation. With this fight, we staged various protests, probably images of those protests many of you have seen around the world. But by fighting and protesting different forms, various forms of violence against women, we ourselves became victims of violence. Why? Simply because we dared to speak out. Simply because we dared to manifest ourselves, to show ourselves, and to disagree. Simply because we refused to stay silent. And I think that that's the point we're going to share. Thank you. And I think that at this panel today, we have very different experience. We have very different stories. We probably disagree on many things, right? Which is a very good thing, I believe. But there is also a lot of things that we share. And one thing that we share is that we are among those who come up with our stories and speak out. We're among those who show maybe with our example that silence is not an option, that fear is not an option, that this is not going to lead us anywhere. So if my story is about one thing, and if I know something very clearly, and if I know something for sure, and that's the thing, that silence will never protect you, and fear will never protect you, and that choosing to remain silent means to just comply and to accept and to support the system and those institutions who oppress you. And of course, by speaking out, by resisting, you automatically become a threat to this system, and you will be treated as a threat. You will have to go through many challenges, but once again, that's the only way to be here, because I believe that staying quiet and silent will never grant you anything and will never give you an opportunity to change something and to do something. And with feminine movement, the movement itself, well, we have a lot of course, myths spread around about us and a lot of controversies about the movement. But I personally define this movement as a group of female dreamers who try to change the world and do not ask for anybody's permission. And that's what we've been doing since 10 years right now in 8 different countries. And what we experience because of this protest, whether you like it or not, what we do is we just take off our tops. We write our slogans, our political political messages, and we appear sometimes in public squares, sometimes we are facing world leaders, but that's all we do. And the violence we face for this is just disproportional. For speaking out and for using our body as political tool, we've been forced into exile. I'm in exile, I live in exile in France in six years. We've experienced violence, persecution, arrest. I was one of the 3 feminine activists who in 2011 in Belarus were kidnapped and tortured by the KGB after one of such protests where we simply took off our top, wrote slogans on our body and shouted slogans. We've been tortured for 24 hours and abducted in the forests. Once again, whether you agree with what we do or not, I think that we probably all will agree that this is a disproportional reaction.
And we're going to get into that.
Right. So if I have to close my opening word, is that if I'm here today, if I have a mission today, then this mission is not to convince you that what I do is right or that you have to do exactly the same thing, but to convince you that keeping silence and being afraid is not an option and is not going to neither protect you nor help you in any of your dreams and our common dreams. So my mission here today to invite everybody to speak out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina. Is this working? Is this working? Is this working? Is this working? Yes, it is. Natalia, do you want to, you're going to speak from the podium?
Yeah, I want to read my...
Natalia's going to tell us a little bit about her story.
When I bring my speech, I want to read my story to share my story with you. 6 years ago, I would have not dreamed or imagined I would have the honor to speaking to you today. Let alone, I would not have imagined that to be standing here, I would have to live a nightmare and later a rebirth. Almost 5 years ago, I was at my mom's house and I received a call. Supposedly, my ex-boyfriend left something for me at the door. I did not pay too much attention, and when I went out to take the garbage, I was surprised by a man in a hood and attacked by a chemical substance. Soon, I felt how my skin was burning. My clothes were teared apart by the substance, and I started losing my sight. By the time I was able to arrive to the hospital, and 37% of my body was burned. At some point, my doctors were not sure what percentage of my internal body was affected. I could be blind or have muscle traumas for a lifetime. It was an environment of no doubt and uncertainty. Today, I thank my doctors, their patience, and their effort. During my recovery, I understood that I had 2 options. The easy way, I could lie in bed, filling myself up with hate and anger. Or the hard way, standing up and making all of this tragedy something greater. And so I did. In 6 months, in 4 months, I will complete 5 years for the day of the attack. I ended a life, and I had planned and started a different one. I believe that after a long process, I can assure that on March 27 of March 2014, I died and I was reborn. Astonishingly, I started a better life, a life with a mission, a life dedicated to a bigger purpose. My attack was not a singularity, and I started to contact with another victims of chemical substances. Taking to other victims was a relief and a pain at the same time. It was a relief and again what happened to me. I required a lot of strength. I would not have accomplished what I accomplished in 4 years and a half if it was not by the strength. It was a mental strength, the effort to understand that pain and suffering was something transcendent. Courage is just a wall without the strength that makes us accomplish goals. Everything we get in life is done by the consequent line of reaching goals. Small or big, that is subjective. My biggest goal at the beginning was getting out of bed like everyone else. Today, my biggest goal is to create a burn unit for hospital in Colombia. The most powerful tool we have is our mind, and it's straight. It gives us the opportunity to earn further and reach higher. None of our goals or mine or yours would have been accomplished without constancy. For me, constancy is the quality to remain invariable regardless of circumstances. It requires keeping yourself firm or mind along the way. Constancy kept me through 36 surgeries, 5 massages a day, no matter how painful they were, and the constant use of a mask that helped me my skin get back to where it was supposed to be. I am not a perfect human being, honestly. No one of us are. But the wonderfulness about being a human being lies in the capacity of resilience and moving forward. In order to do that, it's important to leave the past behind. Forgiveness is what made me stand up and accept myself, accept my fate and move along it. I forgive how others wrong me. I forgive how I wrong myself. But that built me up and give me conscience. Forgiveness and belief is the fuel to move forward. When you move forward, you know where you are heading, but you don't know where you will end at. I started creating a foundation that will help victims of acid attacks like mine. Later, Colombia's government passed a law enforcing the sentences for attackers with chemical substances. Today, I work hard to leave my country with the capacity of responding to these attacks everywhere and to expand the burn units of my country hospital. What will happen next? Don't know. But I trust that with the strength, constancy, and forgiveness, we will keep accomplishing. My message for you today is to take these 3 words, make them yours, use them in any order you will be willing to use them. As a woman, I feel moved by all the victims of this kind of attacks. Also, I feel moved to see that as a woman, we have developed our sense of resilience to its maximum. We have accomplished rights, innovation, offices, and administrations. In so many fields, women help their community to improve their life standards. It is our task to honor what others have accomplished for us, to acknowledge the privileged position we are in. We live now in a world with rights for everyone, because others have cleared the path for us their own courage. We have nothing left than to clear the future path for the future, to have the courage that no matter how tough situations are, we can reach more, not for me or for you, for the generations to come. We gather here today because it's our duty to keep working for those that are not on earth yet, but we will soon. It's our task to keep the future bright. Thank you so much.
Natalia, you may not be, you claim not to be a perfect human being, but you are a remarkable human being. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Rana.
Oh, that is perfect.
2018 is shaping up to be the most deadly year to be a journalist in living memory.
Right.
Some 45 journalists have been killed already this year.
Oh my God.
But it's a particularly difficult and dangerous time to be a female journalist today. Can you share your experience? Give us a brief synopsis of what's happened to you in the last 18 months or so.
Right. Well, before I share my experience of why the United Nations had to intervene this year to ask the Indian government to protect my life, I would like to give a context to the kind of work that I do in India. I'm an investigative journalist, and of course, I'm not somebody who's very popular with the political dispensation. At the age of 26, I sent the first serving Home Minister of India behind bars. Of course, that led to a lot of love coming in my way. That man, the Home Minister, is now the most powerful man in India right now, the president of the ruling party. That's what we do to criminals. The charge against him was that he allowed for the abduction of 3 Muslims, one of whom was a woman who was raped, burnt, and her body thrown into the river. And that was the charge against the minister. I also, at the age of 26, I went undercover to expose the brutalities and the complicity of the present-day Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, for his role in the 2002 genocide of 1,000 Muslims. I went undercover with 8 cameras on my body and exposed the dispensation. So there's a reason why international publications call me one of the most hated women in India. My book, which is an account of the sting operation, was translated into regional language by a well-known journalist called Gauri Lankesh. The government could not do anything to me, but she was shot dead within 3 weeks of translating my book into a regional language. That's the extent of hate that I've witnessed. I've always really seen it as a peril of the profession that I'm a part of. Investigative journalism is not easy. Undercover operations are not easy. So I've really dismissed the hate that came my way. In fact, foreign journalists would joke that, if Rana even puts a full stop, there are 1,000 replies to it, calling me jihadi Jane, ISIS sex slave, and a million other terms. In April this year, there was a gang rape of an 8-year-old Kashmiri girl who was a Muslim, a Kashmiri. She was abducted, she was put in a temple, and she was given sedatives, so she was unconscious throughout the time. She went in a coma while the men kept raping her throughout for a period of 7 days. This was to teach the minority Muslim community a lesson. I don't know why, but so of course, a lot of international news channels reached out to me to speak about it on international forums. I was in BBC, Al Jazeera speaking about it. That outraged the Indian government and the Hindu nationalist regime so much that they decided it's payback time. What did they do? They started with fake tweets about me, about how I hate India, I hate Indians, I support Muslim rapists, Muslim child rapists. One day, I was sitting at a cafe, and I get a video, a porn video, sent by a member of the ruling party who also happens to be a source and a dear friend. He says, I'm going to send this video to you, but please don't be disturbed at what you see. So I said, really, just send it to me. So the video was a pornographic video with a length of 2 minutes, 20 seconds, and my image was morphed in it. I started shaking because as much as we claim to be brave, you are never really ready for something like this. Nothing really prepares you for something like this. Within minutes of that video on my phone, I went on Twitter, and every third tweet was a screenshot of that pornographic video. Within hours, my number, my identity was doxed, my phone number, my address was put on social media. In a country of 1.2 billion people, that pornographic video was on the phone of every 5th Indian. Members of the ruling National Party, they posted on their Facebook page that this woman is defaming India, go to her house and rape her. They had opened me up to a lynch mob. It's, in the sense that you cannot counter my view. How do you discredit me? By making me, in a country like India, where a lot of virtue is placed on a woman's character, how do you discredit her? Call her a promiscuous woman who has sex, and of course, and spread that, and I really did not know how to deal with it. I went to the police station after about 3 days, because for the next 3 days after this video became viral, I was hospitalized for palpitations and anxiety attack, and as much as I called myself brave, I really could not deal with that situation. After 3 days, I got a feminist lawyer in India, a very high-profile one, and we went to file a complaint, and the cops, there are 6 male cops sitting, and so they want to know, they're very amused why I'm showing them the porn video and my image morphed in it, and why do I even need to file a complaint as if I have no shame left, that I'm actually showing it to the cops. So all 6 of them actually sit there and watching the video with a lot of amusement and smiling and watching it, while I'm sitting there trying to file a complaint, and they said, ma'am, we can't file a complaint. Why don't you go to the place, to that jurisdiction where you first opened your Twitter account and saw it? And here, they're doing this to me, all right? They're refusing to file a case by me, a prominent journalist who was a prominent voice. Imagine, I thought at that moment, what would they be doing to a woman in rural India who is, as it is, will be shamed, right? They do not even have the courage. If they can do this to me, imagine what would they do to somebody else. I threatened to file a 0 FIR. Twitter, Facebook complied. They said whoever is spreading it, whoever is sending them Rana threats, we will take action. It's been 6 months since that incident, and there has been no action. I have been called in front of the magistrate. I have given my statement, but there has been, no action yet. I wrote a piece in the New York Times about my ordeal, because nobody had really heard. We all hear about journalists being targeted, but nobody had really heard about a woman targeted like this with a porn video and being, when you're doxxed and using every possible means to discredit me. When I wrote the piece, a week later, the United Nations and 6 UN special rapporteurs wrote to the Indian government. Now look at the brazenness. Indian diplomats criticized me on Twitter that I was defaming the country by letting the United Nations intervene. They were not concerned that something like this is happening to me. They said, you are defaming India because you've got United Nations to interfere in our internal matter. And that's something that happened when Monique's report came in. When Reuters Foundation gave out the report that India perhaps is the most unsafe country for women. And I remember Monique went on a television channel, and I, of course, followed on television channels discussing this report. So the next day, there was a Twitter hashtag which said that a white woman is maligning India's reputation with this report, and this jihadi Jain is using that report to destabilize India. How do you deal with that kind of mindset? Here was I, a journalist who was prominent, and I really thought that people would empathize with me, but there was no empathy because this was routine in India. And for the longest time, I felt, why is nobody reacting? Why don't they think that what happened to me was humiliating me, but for them, it was normal. It was normal what they were doing to me because character assassinating a woman is the easiest thing in the book. Every time in India, every time I've done an investigative report, there is a hashtag which is run by the ruling dispensation, which is Rana Ayub CD. A CD is basically a video, so you are indicating that it's a sex CD. So all Indians, of course, start tweeting about it. Oh, Rana Ayub has a sex life, and there's a video, which is why she's doing this against the government. And this happens every time I do it. What this government does not really understand is, I have self-published a book which is extremely critical of the government, which has damning revelations. Each time they do this, they are only exposing themselves because, in international forums, people want to know why is it that is driving the hate against me. Thanks to this government and this vindictive attitude and this sexual harassment of me, my book is easily one of the biggest bestsellers in Asia with 300 copies in 16 languages.
So we're going to move from Jihadi Jain to another Jain, swiftly. Jane, can you give us a sense of what it's like to have the genetic condition of albinism growing up in Kenya, specifically, and generally in Africa? Can you tell us a little bit about your life story?
Okay. So I'll start by saying albinism is a recessive genetic condition and affects 1 in every 5,000 Africans, while the global statistic is around 1 into 17,000. And as we know, like most people in Africa have dark pigment, so we are outstandingly very visible. So imagine this 16-year-old woman who is in a labor room in a village, and when her baby comes out, the midwife who was assisting her runs away screaming and asking, "What is that?" And that was my mother. And for her, she did not know what was that the nurse was talking about. And when the nurse went to call others to come see that, there was silence in that labor room. There was nobody attending to her. And eventually, when the baby came out, the baby was white. And it's interesting when you have a white baby and you're very black. And for my mom, she could not explain it. And they all started asking her, did you sleep with a white man? And all these weird questions that women will get for getting children that probably don't fit in the normal that the society defines. So for my mom, as a 16-year-old woman, I do not know what I would have done if I was in her shoes, but for her, she knew she's given life, but she did not know what to do with that life that was not accepted even by the medics. And the story I have is she left as soon as I was born, and I was raised by my grandmother. Of course, even for her, to date, she does not understand the genetics of albinism. Of course, I keep trying every time. But yes, yes, but every time, for my grandmother, she raised me because I'm a child like any other child. But imagine this child now going to this society that thinks it's a bad omen to be born the way I was born, a society that thinks if you get a body part from me, you can cure diseases and you can get rich and you can get all this famous just by using a part of my body. A daughter who was born, and the society again believes that if you have sex with me and you have HIV and AIDS, you get cured. Imagine what that means to a little Jane. And I am Jane, yes, I'm speaking for 6 other incredible women I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with in October, and all these women have gone through so much of the challenges that have a gender face. So when you have albinism, it's hard having albinism, but it's difficult being a woman with albinism. And I think it's even more tough being a parent of a child with albinism, just like my mother did. So for me, I have grown up in a society that first sees me as a cure for AIDS, as a source of wealth, and if my mother speaks about someone wanting to attack me or kill me for witchcraft, she's excommunicated from the society. So I want you to see it in the perspective of this woman who does not have albinism and has a child with albinism and all the challenges that she has to carry because she's having a child like me. I want you to see it in the perspective of a small girl who is born, looking up to no role models who have albinism like her. And the first thing, she can't even go to school because she'll be raped on her way to school, because she'll be attacked. If she's not raped, she's attacked for witchcraft. And if she's not attacked for witchcraft, she has no access to learning materials because she has low vision. So women with albinism have been victims and continue being victims of multiple discrimination in so many angles. And I'm left with no choice but summarize my 30-year-old story in 5 to 10 minutes. But I'll tell you, for the 30 years I have lived, it is very, very hard being a woman. But it is also very hard being a woman and not having a voice. And for me, I wasn't like this 10 years ago. I have worked on my own self-esteem because every time I tried to speak, I belonged to the others. And there was no space or platform for me to say what I thought was done wrong to me. And I had no way to fight stigma that I never understood. So, and this really drove me to thinking around talking to other women with albinism. And in the process of talking to other women with albinism, it felt like their stories was similar to my stories. So for me, it was like, this issue of albinism, it's not Jane's issue. I may have gone through some of these challenges, but another woman in another part of Africa has gone through much harder stuff. So besides this incredible team here, I will tell you about an incredible team that I did Mount Kilimanjaro with, and this team had 6 incredible women, myself included. And I talk of Regina from South Africa. She's been raped more than 4 times by different people, thinking that they would get cured. I talk of a lady from Zimbabwe who was literally harassed within her family mainstream, and she did not have a voice because in our culture, you cannot talk about things that don't conform to what our family or our society wants. I'm talking for Mariam. For me, she's the symbol of the struggle and resilience. And Mariam lost her both hands to attackers who took off both her hands in the belief that they used them for witchcraft. And this woman, amidst all these kind of challenges, is back to her feet using prosthetic hands and knitting sweaters and selling them. I do not think there's any other way to change mindsets rather than what Mariam is doing. And I talk of Ma and Onyinye from Senegal and Nigeria, who in a very male-dominated region. They've rose in careers that we could even never imagine, like a person with albinism can score like optometry and, you know, playing the bass guitar. I think it's one of the heaviest instruments anybody could do. So for me, I look at the whole issue of gender and albinism and the intersectionalities of the two as a way that, yes, we've been there, we've been in existence, and yes, we've been left behind. And I am hoping at the end of this panel and moving forward, no woman with albinism should be left behind, even by the fellow women movement. And yes, let's support the inclusion kind. We talk of women issues, talk about every woman. Please don't forget us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Carol, advocate, educate, and legislate. These are three words that it seems to me are fundamentally important in finding solutions to violence against women. And I think there are three words that sum up you. You're a great educator, you're a great advocate, and you're a great legislator. Can you tell us a little bit about your life story and the things that you're seeing at the moment in the women's movement?
Thank you. It's very humbling to follow these great leaders, and I'm going to try. I have been practicing law for about 30 years. Thank you, Monique, for saying that I'm not old. And thank you for noticing my haircut. And I started as a corporate lawyer, and I went to law school to make a lot of money. And I made a lot of money when I started, and I was a little bored. So I decided I was going to take a one-year hiatus, and I was going to work for a family court judge. Now, I'm a Park Avenue lawyer in the United States. That's like a fancy address. And I show up for my first day of work in family court, and I will never forget that. I look, and it's raining, it's cold. Everybody online was African American, Latina, with children, in the rain, in the cold. And I said, what the heck? I had never been in public service. And I come in, and I just said, what? Oh, somebody has to let those women in. And they're like, no, they have to go through the magnetometers. This is the way it is. And I remember thinking, one day, I'm going to be in charge of all of this, and it's going to be a little bit different. And fast forward, right? So that's crazy. I was very young. I was young then. And I worked for this incredible judge in family court. And again, remember, it's going to be a one-year little stint, and I was going to do some public service and go on and make more money. And I couldn't leave. And when you talk about family court in the United States, when you talk about family court in New York, you're talking, it was a hovel, and it was dirty, and it was crowded. And it was like an emergency room of women who had been, and children and men who had been raped. And here's a sex abuse case, and the child here is 3 years old. And I said, oh, I don't think I can do this. And the judge was an African-American male, and he was an incredible role model. And he said, you have something here. You have empathy, and you can figure things out. So crazy things happen, and 3 years later, this low family court judge becomes the highest ranking judge in New York City, right? This is a multi-billion-dollar operation in charge of all the courts, family, civil, criminal, you name it. And he asked me to be his executive assistant, which is the equivalent of the chief operating officer. What the heck? He should have been sued for incompetence. What experience did I have? But again, he saw something in me. So there I was at a very young age, and I learned how things worked. And I was the person who was in charge of or oversaw the budget, technology, human resources, the court officers, the people who are in charge of the lines that make the magnetometers go. And at the time, there was this chief judge. Her name was Judith Kay. And she ran everything that she did through like this equality lens. Now, she's the chief judge of the state of New York, which arguably, for those that don't know judicial systems, is probably the most complicated court system in the United States and perhaps the world. It's that big and that convoluted. And everything she did, every budget that was passed, is it fair? Is it right? Does this make sense? And even though she had been a commercial lawyer for the family and the issues regarding women, she had a specific focus. So I was just like taking it all in, and I become, at a very young age, a judicial expert, a government expert. And that was sort of the brand that I had when I was recruited by the Bloomberg administration when he was putting together his new team to run the city of New York. And for those of you that don't remember, that was right after 9/11, and New York City was in a really, really terrible place. And I thought to myself, I have the best job in the world. I'm helping run the state court system. I have a great boss. And at the time, I had been given another sort of promotion where the chief judge felt that there had been a lot of complaints that were coming up, and people weren't reporting them. Like, you just heard like gossip and rumors of discrimination. So she created the Office of the Special Inspector General for Bias, and she asked me to be the first Special Inspector General for Bias. And I thought to myself, wow, what I can do with that. And so I created, and I kind of made it up as I went along, an office which was independent from the court, had a lot of credibility, and investigations happened in real time when you made a complaint, and things would be handled quickly and professionally. And so what did we find? We found that people started to report more and that problems were being fixed sooner. And I thought, like, wow, I think I just discovered the secret sauce. So when I went to become deputy mayor for legal affairs, I sort of took this equality model that I saw modeled by the chief judge, and I brought it to City Hall. Truth be told, my portfolio was, not the portfolio where you get to cut ribbons and do fun stuff. It was police corruption, it was police misconduct, judicial selection, human rights enforcement laws. And so we did things a little bit differently, and I was able to create a portfolio where equality meant something, if that makes sense, and we were able to create a lot of best practices that a lot of jurisdictions ended up using. So when the administration ended, I saw sort of this tsunami coming towards women's rights, and I couldn't explain it. So while everybody else was, going back to make, even more money, which is probably what a lot of people thought I was going to do, I felt it was really important to take what I had learned and what I had put into practice and use it on behalf of women's rights. And so I've been a CEO of women's rights organizations for Legal Momentum and now the ERA Coalition. And it has been so eye-opening because, for somebody like me where I know how the sausage is made, so when I lobby or when we're doing legislative work or we're talking about doing litigation and people say, oh, well, you can't do it that way because, I'm like, oh, yes, you can, and let me tell you why. Or we can't afford that because there's no money in the budget. Oh, really? Well, I looked at the budget, and let's turn to page 97 because I think we're gonna have another conversation. So it's that kind of knowledge and that kind of know-how that I've been trying to bring sort of on a large scale on a lot of different issues and projects, and working very closely with Thomson Reuters on 2 really big projects in the last 4 years. So that's...
Thank you. Talking for being sued for incompetence, Monique is going to sue me, I'm sure, for my time management. But I did think it was. I wanted everybody to hear your stories. So, Monique, we'll take this up later. How much longer have I got? Yeah, I've got. It says I got 10 minutes. Yes. Is that for 10 minutes? And after we will have the questions. Okay, great. So, so I'm going to have to condense the questions down a little bit here. I'm going to jump. I want to ask you, about Femen and your form of radical feminism. you've specifically, I think, focused on the sex industry as the source of a great deal of the violence, particularly in Eastern Europe. And you have very strong views about prostitution. Can you tell us about that, and also briefly, and also about how the solutions you see on, is there anywhere that's doing this better?
Well, very briefly, coming back to you refer again and again radical feminism, extreme feminism. What is that? So if speaking out loud with woman's voice and woman's body is radical and extreme, then yes, I adhere to extreme and radical feminism, because that's the only thing we do, okay? Just to clarify that. Yes, we did start in Ukraine to work on sex industry, to fight sex industry and sex tourism, which I said is just a big disease for the society, for Eastern European society, where women's destinies are destroyed. We tried to bring up this topic to discussion. That was the first challenge, because that was just a taboo. Everybody knows that this exists, but nobody talks about it. There is a ghost, but we do not see it. And of course, every time you would try to deal with, try to start the discussion about it, everybody would be satisfied with a sort of response, well, prostitution is the oldest profession and there is nothing to do about it. Well, we did not agree with that answer and with that argument, because we consider prostitution not the oldest profession, but the oldest form of oppression. And that was, our fight was exactly about that. We do not consider that legalizing prostitution, and there are many proofs and facts today that this can be the solution. Because destroying legal boundaries, legal challenges for pimps and clients, we also destroy ethical and moral challenges and barriers to consider women and treat women as a commodity. We do not believe that women who, that women deserve to be considered as a commodity, even if you buy a human being for 1 hour. We do not believe that this is the right thing. And I know that this is a very controversial issue, and especially here in Western Europe, we heard a lot of disagreements from feminist movements. There is this romanticized vision about prostitution as something that is a freedom of choice, freedom of sexuality. But let me tell you one thing. Why do you think majority of the women who work in sex industry are women who are, it's a statistic, from Eastern Europe, from Asia and Africa? Why do you think that these women who come from vulnerable backgrounds, why they are those who most often would work in sex industry? And for us, that was the main challenge. That was the main fight from the very beginning. This fight we brought with us even to France.
I want to sort of get into another question as well here, because and link it back. And maybe, actually, before I do, Natalia, why is Colombia such a hotbed specifically for chemical attacks? What is the reason why Colombia in particular has such an issue with chemical attacks?
Okay, my theory is like Colombia used the acid sulfuric to prepare the cocaine in the laboratories. When in Colombia started the narco traffic, this is my theory. In Colombia, they don't believe me. That is the reason that we use that Colombia is the only country, it's not the only country in Latin America, but it has the highest rates of acid attacks in Latin America. And when it started the narco traffic in the laboratories, there is a lot of victims of the guerrillas and the narco traffic. They are born because of the acid sulfuric, because to prepare the cocaine, they use acid sulfuric that is coming from the car batteries. And this is my theory, but nobody believes me in Colombia. And we don't know exactly why Colombia has these highest rates in acid attacks. But this is my theory.
And where are you now in the legislation that you're trying to get through? Are you close, you think, your foundation?
It's gonna take time, you know. It started in 2016. The acid attacks continue in Colombia. But I think to change and to stop the acid attacks, we have to educate the new generations and to empower the women in Colombia and to finish the poverty. And I think the violence doesn't start at schools, it starts in our homes. If a kid grows up in a family that he's watching his father to make violence with his mother, this kid is gonna be really, they're gonna use the violence when they grow up, you know?
Part of the machismo culture, which is particularly an issue in Latin America, with you seeing peaks of violence against women in Honduras, El Salvador, Colombia, Argentina, Mexico. Latin America is really machista, and the system of justice is really machista. We have to change all the system and to increment the gender violence in this agenda, you know? So I'm gonna ask, I'm speeding here, but I want to get into the subject of religion, and I'm turning to you, Rana, and to bring you back in. And but please be as brief as you can. It's a huge subject. So, how, in your view, in a minute, how important is religion as a root cause to some of this violence? In that people are using their interpretation of religion, and it's being acted upon as in a violent way against women. Actually, Rana, do you want to?
Well, in my case, in a country where right-wing Hindu majoritarianism is equated with nationalism, their biggest grudge is how dare a Muslim woman speak up against what's happening in the country. So my religion is being used, the fact that I'm a Muslim is used to justify everything that happens to me. Because if you know, when India and Pakistan were partitioned, and we Muslims who chose to remain in India, and that's about 12 million Muslims who chose to remain in India, they have always been seen as outsiders. We always have to prove our patriotism. In my case, every time there's a lynching or there's an attack on Muslims, I speak up because I have got a voice. And that makes me the subject of attack. And if you see the language that is used against me on social media and critical articles, the kind of language, jihadi Jane, ISIS sex slave, everything has got a religious connotation. They don't want me to speak because I tick all the boxes. I'm a critic of the dispensation. I'm a woman, an investigative journalist, and on top of it, a Muslim woman. And a Muslim woman really riles up fundamentalists on both the sides in India. I mean, there are Muslims also in the country who ask me, where's my hijab? You know, of course, not understanding that that is my choice. And Hindu nationalists ask me, just to provoke me, what kind of a shameless woman are you that you don't wear your hijab, which is prescribed by your community? So it's a form of, basically they use religion to kind of, attack, that's the best resort.
Minute on this.
Right. Well, with feminine campaigning, we brought this question very far. And that's also one of the issues why we're very often called radical feminists, because we did actually went face-to-face with religious institutions and religious authorities on mistreatment of women and all misconception of women.
That's radical?
Considered to be. Once again, what's radical? That's the question. Well, and I will tell you that, yes, we did go face-to-face in front of religious extremists. We paid visit to Pope. We did all sort of...
What did he say?
He waved and ran away. That's what all men do when they see us. They run away. Speaking seriously about it, well, religion, historically, the conflict between women and religion is a historic conflict. And whether we want to recognize it or we do not want to recognize it, and there are many people who do not want, and I know it, I think that we have a very extreme, urgent need to speak about question of religion, women's rights, human rights, in general, because we're always told, oh, well, don't go into that issue. It's very sensitive. It's very dangerous. But why it's sensitive? Why it's dangerous? Maybe because we're just not ready to talk about it. Maybe because we didn't treat this issue well and we didn't share our experience. So as a feminist activist, I do consider that religion have a serious responsibility for violence against women. We know it from history, but we also observe today how even the rock star, so-called pope, very progressive pope, is touring around the world to campaign against abortion. We see how extremist groups rise up.
I'm gonna have to run away from you in a minute. But I want to just, I'm out of time, but I'm going to, again, go a little bit over time.
We need to have the questions, sorry.
Well, I just want...
Another panel after, this is not fair. Sorry, we have to respect the timing. So now, last question, 1 minute answer for the two last who have not spoken, and then we go to the questions of the room.
She's tough. You're applauding the fact that she's tough, that's good. Carol, Me Too movement.
Okay,
I want
60 seconds.
Wrap this up to the other, and Julia.
So,
about, can you just speak very quickly?
So 60 seconds on Me Too. When I was listening to Julia speak, that's exactly what's happening in the United States today. No different whatsoever. Yeah. So we now have this social media movement that has inspired women to come forward in whatever way they're comfortable. What happens as a result? Well, one thing that came up as a result was Time's Up. $30 million was raised by corporate America. $30 million. But the focus is to hire lawyers for women to sue. I'm a lawyer. I like lawsuits. But the fact of the matter is that we want to prevent the discrimination from happening in the first place. So in terms of what do we see that should be happening post Me Too, and again, our wonderful keynote covered both points. Human rights laws, criminal laws already exist today, and they must be enforced, and they must be funded, right? That's a theme that I bring out all the time. So we have a lot of the resources, we have a lot of the tools. I think $30 million is gonna buy a lot of goodwill. It's gonna pay for a hell of a lot of lawyers. I think some of that money has to be used for advocacy, so then we can talk not just about suing the bad guys, and I love to sue bad guys. I stood on this podium 2 years ago, and I told you how I was gonna sue Backpage.com and close them down, and everybody said it's impossible, and those two guys now are wearing orange jumpsuits and are in jail right now. So it's with that same vision, right? 2 years ago, Monique, people thought it wasn't gonna happen, that I say that we're gonna take the Me Too movement and we're going to demand that the human rights commissions that already exist, the laws that are already existing to protect women, that the investigations be done in real time, that prevention be part of the issue, and these box-checking exercises that corporations pay millions. I would be such a rich person right now with the skills that I have if I worked and just did those trainings around the country, around the world.
So we've got to take one or two questions from the floor. Big bias to questions for Jane, who I haven't asked. So, there's right here. Yeah. Number.
You have to run with the microphone, please, because we have no time.
Hi. Yes, my name is Lorik. I'm from Armenia. Girls of Armenian Leadership Soccer. We create football or soccer teams for girls. So my question is related to the statement that I believe we most of the time pay attention on women empowerment. We educate them about gender equality. And I recognize that we have to also educate men why gender equality is important. I wanted to know what actions and movements you have done and what actions have been done to educate men and to have them involved in this empowerment movement.
Great question. Jane.
Yes, so especially with albinism, because it is in all sexes, the only reason it has an entry point of gender is because it's women who eventually bring life. And in our movement, of course, we have a lot of parents who have children with albinism. We have men with albinism themselves who are part of acknowledging that women with albinism are more behind even when it comes to issues of human rights violations. So yes,
But lots of the people that are making those violations, the perpetrators are men. So are you specifically focusing going into schools and asking, trying to educate boys about this issue?
Yes, we have a mentorship program, and it's inclusive of boys and girls in schools, both elementary and high school. And the main essence is to promote the whole self-respect, self-dignity, and, of course, protection of human rights.
Thank you. I mean, I think the whole issue of educating boys is so incredibly important. We're going to find solutions for this. Other question, one more question, I think, or I'm going to go to two. Monique's going to kill me. Let's leave there, number two then.
Hi, everyone. I want to address my question to Ina Shevchenko. I really admire you and your movement, but I wanted to ask you about topless protests and nudity. I mean, I know that topless protests and nude protests, they gain and grab lots of attention, which is good. But my question is, don't you think that, that these protests, they kind of play up to the certain stereotypes about, like negative stereotypes about feminists, and most of all, that women like only can get attention by the means of their physicality? So
you've got that question.
It's not like I'm against that, it's just like I wanted to...
I think we got the question, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Look, there's been, it's a history of world making. A woman's body was regarded as a sexual object. It was sexualized by everybody, everywhere, and until today. So saying that naked body, showing naked woman's body sexualizes women is actually supporting what patriarchal culture and institutions were doing for years. So what we are doing is that we're trying to reverse it. We're trying to put this body that is usually considered to be sexual by definition, we're putting it in political context. We are writing our political slogans on our body. My body always speaks. My body always expresses something. It demands something. Very often it expresses anger and political demands. So what we are doing is that we are making this body political and not sexual. And what we are saying by this act, that now it's me, woman, who's going to define when my body is sexual and when it is political. It's no longer church, it's no longer institutions, it's no longer the public who's going to define. It's me now.
And my body is expressing terror at the wrath of Monique Villa, but despite that, I'm going to be brave and go for another question. Number three over there.
Thank you. I'm Sister Linda Dealov, and I would just want to say that religion and women are not always polarized. I'm on exactly the same page as you, Ina, with respect to prostitution. And I would say to you, so is the Pope. And I think that's really important to note. Sometimes what we do is we set things up against each other. Not all of the issues that we're on the same page as, are polarized like that.
Thank you.
So I would want to ask you, do you believe that religion and the rights of women are always polarized? And what can we do to influence that?
I will tell you, thank you very much for this remark and the question. Briefly, very shortly to say, I do believe that you can be a religious person and feminist, no question, no doubt. I, however, do not believe that feminism can be religious, that we can look on women's rights through religious prism, through religious dogma, because religious dogma is a male-favoring dogma. And I personally, this is my personal passion. I work on this issue personally as a part of Femin, but also in my academic parcours. I'm very fascinated and right now very intrigued by these women who try to change religious institutions and religious dogma from within. Those women, imam, priests, rabbis, who take the power in male religious institutions where they're not allowed to do as it's written in the dogma, and they try to change and they try to feminize patriarchal institutions. I believe that this is something we should look in, and I'm really looking forward to see for more results. So once again, there is no dogmatism that religion and women always are polar and do not work together. However, I do believe that we need to change dogma to be able, it's feminism that will change religion. It's not religion that has to affect feminism.
Thank you. Okay. I think I'm out of time. Am I out of time now, Monique? You're scowling at me. One last question.
You're brave.
There's a question over here. And I'm going to say that this is not allowed to be for Ina. She's brilliant, but I want to spread the love.
Hello, I'm Patricia Carmona from Gendes, from Mexico. And it's a really simple question, but I think it's a potent one. What's next after Me Too?
Who wants to answer that? Carol?
Well, what's next after Me Too in the United States, and I think it serves as a model for the rest of the country, is constitutional equality. Because you can raise $30 million, you can raise $60 million to hire all the lawyers you want. And all that means is that the line to the courthouse is going to be that much longer with aggrieved women. So in order to stop that, women in the United States need to have constitutional equality, which we do not have, which is what we're advocating for. And so when the principal document, which governs you, does not include you, and you don't know that, you have a problem on your hands. So we're doing a lot of education, and we're doing equality roadshows around the United States, my organization in conjunction with the 90 other organizations that are a part of the ERA Coalition. And we want this to serve as a model for the rest of the world. In the rest of the world, equality is in some of the constitutions. So that is not necessarily the issue, it's just not enforced. And so it is going to be a reckoning. And we're looking not for, $10 million more to hire more lawyers. I mean, well, I'll take it. But we want to have the whole thing. We want to have constitutional equality, and we want to be able to enforce the rights that we already have.
I think I really need to make this one point about Me Too, because in India, we have had a very late Me Too, but we, in a patriarchal country like India, with the way the women's voices are stifled, the power of women led to the resignation of the foreign minister of India. And that's the power of Me Too in India, which we never thought or imagined. It is also in India, in a country like ours, we women have understood the patriarchy that we inherited ourselves. Because we understood the nuances of what sexual harassment really constitutes. So Me Too in India particularly has been the most liberating and cathartic experience so far for women.
That's great, thank you. Yeah. With that, Natalia, Rana, Jane, Carol, Ina, thank you very, very much. Thank you for your...